You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there are two huge pieces of sports news to get to today, along with a couple of college basketball games. You'll also get this day in sports history and a Mount Rushmore. But I gotta start with AJ Bouye being sent to the Broncos. He was sent to the Mile High City for a 4th-round pick, and I gotta say the Broncos easily win this trade. We all knew that Chris Harris was probably gonna leave Denver. His name had been mentioned in trade rumors for a while, and now with his contract being up, you had the sense that he was on the way out. I think he makes sense for the Jets, but I prefer Byron Jones. That's not the issue. The issue is Chris Harris, and it's going to be very interesting to see where he ends up. I like Chris Harris. I think Harris has gotten a little bit of a bum rap recently. He's still really good. Yeah, he's on the older side, but he's still one of the best corners in the NFL. And there are some people that don't want him because he's going to be 31 when the season starts. He can still play. You know, I understand that you want to get younger and it's a young man's game. I understand that, but if you can still play at an older age, you can still play. Having said that, though, if you are on the older side and Chris Harris is nearing the end of his career, if you're a GM, you've got to be hesitant of giving him a big contract. Now, do I think Harris still has a few good years left? Yeah, but it's a big gamble. It's a big gamble to give a guy a huge contract in free agency when he's going to be 31 when the season starts. John Elway evidently decided that the risk was too much for his blood, so he traded for AJ Bouye, who had a bad year last year. There's no question. But everyone in Jacksonville had a bad year. We've been over this. That team is on a downward spiral, and it's going to be very difficult to pull out of it. I don't even know if it's possible to pull out of it. The Jaguars are in for a few bad years, and they want to accelerate the rebuild by getting rid of someone on a big contract who didn't have a good year last year. And the 4th-round pick isn't nothing. To get that for a guy who is on a huge contract and struggled last year, that's a good move by the Jaguars. But having said that, I think Bouye is going to do great in Vic Fangio's system. It's very similar to Houston's system in 2016 when Bouye emerged as one of the best corners in the league. All you have to do is just watch the tape and you can see the similarities. I think this is going to work out really, really well for the Broncos. I like their future. It took John Elway a while, but he finally found his quarterback of the future in Drew Lock. I think the Broncos easily won this trade. Having said that, though, I know why Jacksonville did it. They're starting a huge rebuild, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I feel for you, Jaguars fans. This is not going to be a pleasant experience for you. Moving on now to the Christian Yelich extension. And Ken Rosenthal was the one who first reported that they were closing in on an extension, but Joel Sherman was the first one who pegged the total at 9 years at $215 million. John Heyman said that the club option that Yelich had at $15 million for 2022 has been torn up, and this new deal will supersede that. This extension doesn't kick in until 2022. You can make the argument that Christian Yelich is still underpaid. Even counting this new extension, he's still drastically underpaid. This is a guy who the second he was traded to the Brewers looked like the second coming of Robin Yount and Paul Molitor put together. I don't know when the last time before Yelich a player won MVP on a new team. Someone would need to tell me that. But that's what Yelich did. And he followed it up with an arguably better season. His batting average went up, his home runs went up, yeah, his RBIs went down, but he was playing in less games. He played in 17 less games, and he still hit 8 more home runs last year than he did in 2018. And you take a look at what the Brewers gave up to get him. Monty Harrison, his stock has kind of taken a hit recently. He used to be a consensus top 80 prospect, but he's not that anymore. He got hurt last year, and it's really a shame because I thought he could have made his MLB debut last year. It looks like it's going to be this year. I think Harrison will be fine. He's just got to improve on making contact. Other than that, though, he's a 5-tool player. He just has to work on getting the bat on the ball. That's the thing with Harrison. I think it's something that can be fixed. I like Monty Harrison. But the thing is, though, while Yelich has put up 2 MVP caliber seasons, Monty Harrison hasn't played a single game in the majors. Lewis Brinson looks like a bust. Isan Diaz didn't set the world on fire last year, and I have no idea how he's going to do this year. I can't necessarily say I'm confident in his chances of succeeding in the majors. The second best player in that deal may be the afterthought, Jordan Yamamoto. And even then, Yamamoto didn't set the world on fire last year. Now, in spring training, he looks good, but no one's going to be mistaking him for Josh Beckett. That trade could very easily go down in baseball history as one of the worst trades ever. If the only guys to work out for the Marlins are Harrison and Yamamoto, then yeah, this is Brock for Brolio. When you trade a guy like Yelich, we all knew Yelich was talented. We just didn't know he was this talented. But when you trade a guy like Yelich, you really don't have the luxury of missing on your trade targets. Now, can you miss on one? Yeah, I guess. Especially if it's not one of the marquee guys in the deal. Like, the Gleyber Torres deal. The Yankees got a player in the Gleyber Torres deal by the name of Rashad Crawford. There's a reason that you've never heard that name before. He's an afterthought. He's never played a game in the majors. No one cares that it didn't work out with him. You know why? Because the Yankees got Gleyber Torres. The crown jewel of the Yelich trade was Brinson. Now, Monty Harrison was the second best player in that deal. Okay, fine. But Brinson looks like a bust. Isan Diaz was the third best player in that deal. His future isn't that bright. No matter which way you slice it, it was a terrible, terrible trade for the Marlins. And that's the understatement of the year. As it stands under this extension, Yelich is due to make just under $24 million a year. And that's for a guy who has back-to-back MVP caliber seasons. Let's see where that ranks for outfielders in terms of average annual value. That puts him 8th. Trout, Cespedes, Harper, Josh Hamilton, Stanton, Cespedes again, and Trout. You know what? I got news for you. Yelich should have gotten at least $30 million. He's not better than Trout. You don't pay him as much as Mike Trout. But you've got to pay him more than Cespedes. How did Christian Yelich not get more than Cespedes? How did he not get more than Harper? Look, forget total value. We all knew that the total value wasn't going to be $300 million. He's 28 years old. And he's not hitting free agency. He's negotiating with one team. Those guys don't get $300 million. But they do get high AAVs. Christian Yelich is still incredibly underpaid. I don't know who his agent is. Oh, it's Paragon Sports International. Whatever the hell that is. He needs Boris. You know what? He wanted to be a Brewer, I guess. You can't begrudge a player for that, but all in all, this is a coup for Milwaukee. Moving on now to college basketball, and holy cannoli, did Michigan State, Penn State give me a scare. I did pick Michigan State, and for the first half and part of the second half, it looked like I was going to be very wrong. But Michigan State put together a fantastic second half. They almost doubled up Penn State, and they won. This was a fantastic performance for Xavier Tillman. Cassius Winston didn't get involved until late. It's very interesting that Michigan State can find these different ways to win. Even a guy like Aaron Henry, who I said needed to step up, and look, he didn't have a bad game. 12 points, 8 rebounds. That's not bad. But he wasn't their third best player. Their third best player was actually Cassius Winston. But their second best player was Rocket Watts. This is a guy who's flown under the radar all year, but in these big games, he steps up. He's just not fazed by the big moment. That quality for such a young player is incredibly rare. I think Watts has a future in the NBA. Certainly not as an all-star, but as a bench player, you could do a lot worse. Penn State didn't play bad. The game went about as well as you could have expected for Penn State. I mean, I just didn't think they were better than Michigan State, but you know what? They still had a chance to win this game. But Lamar Stevens put together one of the worst performances I've ever seen from him. He shot 3 for 19 from the field. How do you shoot 3 for 19 from the field with the entire college basketball world watching? The only reason that he had 15 points was because he was 9 for 14 from the charity stripe. And some of those calls were ticky-tacky, to say the least. This was a terrible performance for Penn State. I do not like them in the big dance. I am putting them on upset alert. I think it is very, very possible that they're out even in the first round. It's very possible that they don't win a damn game. Michigan State, on the other hand, that's a scary team. I'll repeat what I said earlier. I love that they can beat you in different ways. That's what you need to do to be successful in the big dance. Moving on now to Villanova Seton Hall. And this is about as even of a matchup as you're going to get. Villanova has the 119th best offense in the nation in terms of points per game, and they have the 77th best defense in the nation in terms of points allowed per game. When you look at Seton Hall, their offense is the 74th best in the nation, and their defense is the 118th best in the nation. It's incredible how similar those numbers are. Both these teams are very well balanced. Both these teams have really good coaches. Is Jay Wright better than Kevin Willard? The answer is yes, but Willard's no slouch. Villanova has 5 guys that can kill you on any given night. Sadiq Bey, Colin Gillespie, Justin Moore, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, and Jermaine Samuels. Their offense is scary. I don't know how it's only 119th. If you had asked me before, I'd have said top 50. Easy. But Seton Hall has the best player in this game in Miles Powell. He had a really good year last year, and he's followed it up this year with another really good year. I think he has a very bright future in the NBA. This is going to be a fantastic game. Could this be the game of the year? I wouldn't go that far, but it's very possible that this could be one of the 20 best games of the year. Maybe more, maybe 15. Hell, maybe even 10. I think this game is going to go into overtime. You have no idea how much I don't want to make a pick. I mean, I can make a case for Villanova to win this game. I can make a case for Seton Hall to win this game. All in all, since Seton Hall is home, I'm going to go with the Pirates, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Wildcats won. Alright, it's time for this day in sports history. On this day, in 1888, in Voss, Norway, I actually did not know that this guy was Norwegian. I should have, but I didn't. Knut Rockne was born. Now, even though his coaching career started over 100 years ago, you really should know who this guy is. This guy is, without question, one of the most influential coaches in football history, both college and professional. You know how you like seeing Patrick Mahomes throw those deep passes down the field? And you like seeing all those flashy catches by receivers like Michael Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins and Odell Beckham? Well, none of that would have happened if not for the summer of 1913 at Cedar Point, where I have been actually, in Sandusky, Ohio. It was there, with Rockne working as a lifeguard, and his quarterback. Rockne was a wide receiver for Notre Dame. Back then they called him ends. But in modern parlance, he was a wide receiver. And Gus DeRay was the quarterback of Notre Dame. Rockne was working at Cedar Point as a lifeguard. DeRay, I think, was a busboy. But the two of them would practice routes on the sand. They would practice forward passes. And no one had seen anything like it before. that offense wasn't the first offense to use the forward pass, but it certainly was the best at it in terms of those early teams. There was a game against Army that Notre Dame had no business winning, but Notre Dame destroyed Army because they had a great run game and an excellent forward passing game. In 1918, Rockne took over as head coach at Notre Dame. If you were to watch any of those early games, and I haven't, I'll be honest, I have never watched a full game. I don't think full games from that time period exist. But I have seen some highlights, and they look completely foreign. The Notre Dame box, as it was called, featured an unbalanced line and two backs, the tailback and the fullback, lining up behind the quarterback on either side. In essence, the quarterback was under center, but the tailback and the fullback were lined up behind the quarterback to the left and to the right of him if he was lined up in the shotgun. It's a really crazy system, but it worked. The quarterback would roll to the right and would deliver a pass. And it was incredible. Nothing like that had ever been done before. And the 7-2-2 defense. That means that there were 7 down linemen. It was basically a goal line defense as their standard defense. Those teams of George Gipp and Curly Lambeau are some of the most dominant teams in college football history. And we all know that when George Gipp was near death, he said to Knute Rockne, "Win just one for the Gipper." I hope you've seen that movie. That's a very good movie. Knute Rockne, All-American, with Pat O'Brien as Rockne and Ronald Reagan as Gipp. Very, very good movie. Go see it if you haven't. You know what he died of? Pneumonia. That he got from strep throat. Back then, antibiotics were unheard of. In 1924, Rockne had a backfield comprised of Jim Crowley, Don Miller, and Elmer Layton. And the quarterback was Harry Stuhldreher. If you don't know any of those names, you should be ashamed of yourself. They were called the Four Horsemen. Probably the most dominant offense in college football history. Better than Matt Leinart, better than Vince Young, better than Roger Staubach, better than Tim Tebow, better than Archie Griffin, better than all of them. And the picture of them on those horses, with Grantland Rice's quote outlined against the blue-gray October sky, the Four Horsemen rode again, I actually have that on my wall. And I hate Notre Dame. In 1926, Rockne was the victim of one of the biggest upsets in college football history, where his team lost to Carnegie Tech. But Knute Rockne was not on the sidelines. He traveled to Chicago for the Army-Navy game to help select an All-America team. Carnegie Tech used Rockne's absence as motivation, and they shut out Dame 19-0. And because of that loss, Notre Dame did not win a national title. In 1928, Rockne was the victim of one of the greatest individual performances in college football history. Peter Pund killed Notre Dame and helped Georgia Tech become national champions. I don't think I've ever seen footage of that game, but from what Rockne said, it was one of the most dominant performances he had ever seen, and I'll take his word for it. In 1931, he was traveling to participate in the Spirit of Notre Dame, which I have never seen. I know that the Four Horsemen played themselves, but as Rockne was flying there, one of his plane's wings broke up, and the flight crashed in Kansas, killing everyone on the flight. The president at the time, Herbert Hoover, called Rockne's death a national loss, and the King of Norway posthumously knighted him and sent a personal envoy to his funeral that was attended by over 100,000 people. It was also broadcast on radio in the US, Europe, and parts of South America and parts of Asia. There is no more influential coach in college football history than Knute Rockne. May he rest in peace. Alright, now it's time for another Mount Rushmore. This one was kind of tough. If you've been keeping score, you know that I'm on the Chicago Cubs. And I was debating between 5 guys. Cap Anson, Ernie Banks, Ryne Sandberg, Billy Williams, and Sammy Sosa. Anson, Banks, and Sosa were easy, but the fourth was tough. Ryne Sandberg or Billy Williams. Ultimately, I went with Rhino because I wanted to have a player from those 2 Cubs teams of the 80s that made the NLCS, but just couldn't win that final game. One of them was partially due to Leon Durham. The other one was due to the fact that they were just facing a better team in the Giants. The correct Mount Rushmore is Cap Anson, Ernie Banks, Sammy Sosa, and Ryne Sandberg. Cap Anson was the best hitter of his era. In the 1880s, there was no better hitter than Cap Anson. The guy led the National League in RBIs 7 times that decade. And in his career, won 4 batting titles. 3 of them in that decade. He actually led the National League in RBIs 8 times, but the 8th time was in 1891. He played until he was 45 and was still incredibly dominant in his age 45 season. He had 285 with 3 home runs and 75 RBIs. I understand that the home runs don't jump out at you, but the RBIs are still pretty impressive. Granted, it wasn't as great a year as he had earlier in his career, but that was still a really, really good year. There are a lot of people that'll put Mr. Cub, Ernie Banks, at the top of their Mount Rushmore. I couldn't do it just because Banks never played in a playoff game for the Cubs. He played on a bunch of lousy Cubs teams, and ultimately, I have to punish him for that. It's a great day for a ball game, let's play 2. I get that. He's a Hall of Famer, as he should be, but he's not better than Cap Anson. He's second, though. No shame in that. It's kind of amazing to me how Sammy Sosa has fallen by the wayside. This is a guy who is the only player in baseball history to hit at least 60 home runs in 3 different seasons. And in none of those years did he lead the league in home runs. 1998, he hit 66 home runs. He beat Maris's record, but not before Mark McGwire did. And McGwire finished with 70 home runs that year. And when we talk about guys who used steroids getting into the Hall of Fame, we talk about Bonds and Clemens. We don't talk about Sammy Sosa. Sammy Sosa finished his career with 609 home runs, 545 of them with the Cubs. If you want to put Bonds and Clemens in the Hall of Fame, then you have to put Sosa in also. You have to put McGwire in also. You even have to put Rafael Palmeiro in also. You can't pick and choose. Also, Sosa was part of one of the worst trades in baseball history, as he was traded along with Ken Patterson to the Cubs for George Bell. George Bell only played 2 years for the White Sox, only one of which he was any good, and Sammy Sosa hit over 500 home runs for the Cubs. Ryne Sandberg is probably my favorite Cub of all time. When I was younger, I'd watch a bunch of old baseball VCRs, because back then DVDs weren't as widespread as they are now. I had a VCR player attached to my TV, and I actually only got rid of it in 2013. And the only reason I got rid of it was because my TV didn't have an HDMI port, so I couldn't play my brand new Xbox One. Actually, it's kind of funny. The night that I got the Xbox One, I got the Xbox One the day it came out, November 22nd. November 21st, I met Mariano Rivera at a cocktail party. Really, really fun 24 hours for me. But Ryne Sandberg was probably the best second baseman of his era. 10-time All-Star, 9-time Gold Glover. He has an MVP. And he was, without question, the best player on those 1980s Cubs teams. It's not even close. Tomorrow, I'm going to break down Villanova Seton Hall and preview Illinois versus OSU. Until then, I am Jacob Valk saying that all coaches religiously carry fungo bats in the spring to ward off suggestions that they're not working.